To all the viewers of the State of Affairs podcast, welcome back on this Sunday. I have a very, very special guest with me today for a discussion on West Asian geopolitics, uh, Mr. Mudasir Quamar. He is working as a research, associate fellow with Manohar Parikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. We'll be talking in this entire half-hour discussion and conversation about the shifting geopolitical things in West Asia. First of all, I would like to introduce him since he has lots of things to his credit and under his belt. He is an author of Education System in Saudi Arabia of Change and Reforms, which was published in 2021. He also co-authored India's Saudi Policy, Bridge to the Future, which was published in 2019, and also wrote a monograph where he actually, it's named Erdogan's Turkey, Politics, Populism, and Democratization Dilemmas. And specific interest area when it comes to him is that he has a very good knack for Saudi Arabia and Turkey foreign and domestic politics. He also has, an interest in a specific area, politics and societies in Arabian Gulf, political Islam, Middle East, and strategic affairs. Apart from that, I have been quoting him many a times in my research papers about many things that I also have written upon. A very inspiring person when it comes to me as an individual, and also a lot of people who follow him for his work. We'll be talking about this West Asian geopolitics. I first of all like to welcome him on the conversation.
Thank you, Miraj. Thank you for the kind introduction. I'm glad to join you today, this
There are
morning.
lots of questions, but I guess we may be running out of the time, so I'll just rush down to the session. The first thing is that I would like you to delve upon draw us a landscape of the entire geopolitical transformation that's happening in West Asia. What are the key things that we have to look upon as researchers, as students, or as analysts of this region?
I think that is something which is very important to understand. So, if you look at the West Asia region, there are three things which are key to understand it. The first thing is the internal political systems, internal instabilities, or internal problems which the countries in West Asia are facing, whether it is political problems, economic problems, and so on. So that becomes very important. So there are countries, for example, look at the situation in Iraq, or look at the situation in Syria, or look at the situation in Lebanon, for example. These are internally very unstable countries. And because of these instabilities, it also goes into the regional, situation. Apart from the internal situations, the regional geopolitics becomes very important. The relationship between different countries within the region. One of the biggest ironies of West Asia region is usually it is understood to be a very homogeneous region in terms of religion, culture, language, and so on. But there is no unity, or unity would actually be a very big word to use. There is no understanding between the countries. There are a lot of rivalries, tensions, whether it is based on sectarian issues, based on political issues, or any other issue. The geopolitical tension among different countries for various historical factors, contemporary factors, and so on. For example, the problems between Iran and Saudi Arabia, or for example, the problem between Israel and Iran, or the tensions between Turkey and different other countries, Turkey and UAE, or Turkey and Egypt. So if you look at any of the country, any of the major powers, regional powers, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Israel, Turkey, Egypt, they have often found each other on different sides of the divide. So the regional divisions, that is something which is very important to keep in mind when looking at the region. The third is the external involvement, the involvement of external powers in regional politics. That has also played a very, I would say, prominent role in destabilizing the region and in sometimes stabilizing the region. So this dichotomy also has to be understood. It's not just the destabilizing factor. For example, if you look at the United States, since the Second World War, it is the preeminent external power in the region. And it has played both stabilizing factor sometimes and a destabilizing factor sometimes. For example, if you look at the situation in Iraq today, a large part of it is the outcome of or the consequence of what happened in 2003, the US invasion of Iraq. But if you look at, for example, 1991, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, so the United States came along with different regional and other countries and brought stability to the region at that point of time. Similarly, if you look at the situation in Lebanon, on and off, US involvement has been destabilizing, and then it has also played a stabilizing. But US is not the only external, actor which is involved in the regional politics. And since the end of Cold War, very brief unipolar, global unipolar moment, uh, other countries have started to come in. So Russia has gradually increased its involvement during the Cold War. It was very much a de facto regional actor in that sense, but gradually after after the end of Cold War, it retreated and started coming back in the 2000s. And obviously, when the civil war broke out in Syria, it militarily intervened in 2015. China has, in recent years, especially since 2013-14, has come up in the region in a big way, especially in the economic arena. And then you have the EU countries, which have some legacies of the past in terms of their involvement in the region. New middle powers such as India and many others, Japan, have also gradually increased their involvement, not in the regional politics, but in the economic sphere. And that also is significant if one looks at the regional situation. So, in a nutshell, these three things becomes very important: the internal political economic situation within these countries, the regional geopolitical rivalries, and the external involvement in regional geopolitics.
That's very interesting introduction about the entire region. But I'll come to the internal dynamics of West Asia, I guess, later part of this conversation. But the primary thing is that when we talk about US involvement in the region, specifically after Biden administration took over, and we can just gauge from this thing that the center of the hotspot of the present current geopolitical happenings is obviously Indo-Pacific. There is no denying the fact. But US involvement in the region of Middle East or West Asia, where do you see? You have written on this, Biden's dilemmas, in a recent publication. Why do you see that US involvement vis-a-vis this Middle East and vis-a-vis this Indo-Pacific as a new theater of geopolitics? Is it that US is withdrawing, or is it that it's not that much important a region for US, even if it has got some good friends out there and its strategic interest there? Or we can see that yes, it's just dehyphenating a bit from this region, but Indo-Pacific has become the primary importance for US foreign policy.
True. Now, as far as US is concerned, there are two, three things which are becoming very important as far as the Middle East is concerned. There is a myth that US is withdrawing from the region. That is a myth, actually. It's not. US is not withdrawing from the Middle East. It is very much presence. And why I'm saying this, just look at the facts. Look at the number of military bases the United States has in the region. No other country can match that. And perhaps no other region can match the number of US military bases. I think even the Indo-Pacific, with all its current debates, the US military presence is not as much as it is in the Middle East, especially in the Persian Gulf region. That is something which is very important to note, that US is not withdrawing based on the number of military presence in the. Second, if you look at political influence of the United States in the region, it has not necessarily, it has come down a bit, both because the regional actors are becoming more assertive in their foreign policy, more independent, if you can use the word, in their foreign policy, and also because of the shifting US focus to other areas. So it's not withdrawal. There, the focus is shifting to other areas because of the global geopolitical developments. China's rise has is seen as a challenge in the U.S. foreign policy, circles, U.S. strategic circles, and that is why there is a shift that you need to focus on the Indo-Pacific, China's, area of influence, where the U.S. and many other countries have legitimate interest. It's a global open. It's not China's territory, and they want to see to it that it doesn't become a hegemonic space for China. There's space for other countries as well, and that is something which is the second point, that the regional countries are becoming more assertive because of certain many number of factors. And then US is, why the regional countries are becoming more independent? Because they recognize the fact that they cannot, and this is based on developments over the last decade or decade and a half, where the US was found wanting when the regional countries were looking for external ally, or their actually the US is their ally, many of the regional countries. For example, if you look at, especially during the Arab Spring protests when it started, for example, if you look at Egypt, many countries in the region expected that the US will perhaps try and intervene and stop what was happening in Egypt, and the same in other countries. For example, in Bahrain, it was eventually the GCC-led Peninsula Shield Force, which intervened militarily to bring stability in Bahrain. Otherwise, most likely, we would have seen the fall of, Al Khalifa family in Bahrain. So, same is the situation in Syria. Then the rise of ISIS. US was not found very willing to assert its presence in the region, whether militarily. It eventually did. For example, in the defeat of ISIS, eventually it was the US military involvement which led to, not to discount the fact that other countries, other players also played very important role. Russia, Iran, the Kurdish Peshmerga, and all that. But eventually it was the US which had to come back. There is a reason for US to be tentative uh, in the region. It's not necessarily about US interest in the region or US foreign policy. It emanates largely from what is happening domestically within the United States. The 2008-9 economic instability, the economic crisis, and the two wars which it fought in the name of war on terror in Afghanistan and Iraq led to serious backlash from the people, saying that why are you fighting wars, so costly wars, and to what end? And then a lot of people lost their loved ones in these wars. So these were the factors which kind of defines what Biden is trying to do currently in the region. He is trying to keep the region involved as much as possible, to engage the region as much as possible, to keep its allies, Saudi Arabia, other GCC countries, Israel, Egypt, Jordan. Jordan is a very important ally of the United States. To keep them engaged and uh, aware of what US interests are and what are the issues which it thinks are important. And also encouraging some kind of a greater understanding among themselves. And Abraham Accords was part of that. That you engage among each other also and deal with some of the problems, because I have other priorities. There are domestic problems which I have to take care of, and then there are global geopolitical issues which I have to take care of. The second part of it is that There are middle powers also, which US is looking at. Some of the European countries, France, Germany, UK, Japan, India, Australia, to try and see that these countries also become better, more involved in the regional, developments to keep the region stable. So the regional stability becomes very important for the regional actors, for external actors, for global, issues as well, energy security, shipping, shipping, all these things. So this is what Biden is trying to do, slightly different from how Trump approached the region, where belligerence became, the approach. More or less, the situation is same. I mean, the aims and scopes are same, but the style of functioning is different. It is more friendly approach, more friendlier approach, more rational approach, if you want to use that word. Trump, on the other hand, was very belligerent in how he wanted to proceed in the region.
We can safely assume now that it's not that US is withdrawing from the region, it's actually shifting of the folks from Middle East to the Indo-Pacific, given the geopolitical landscape and realities at the global level we are actually being in, and the domestic pulls also, they define where the foreign policy direction will be from the US perspective. uh, when you mention about the regional powers like Turkey, you have also written on this very substantially. Where do you see that this Turkey, and and Erdogan, his philosophy, entire worldview or the regional view? Where are Turkey's strategic interests? What's the confrontation that inevitably will stem out of it? Where do you see this thing happening?
Now, if you look at Turkey, Turkey is a very, very important actor in the regional politics. There is something very unique about Turkey. It is it is not only a Middle Eastern actor. If you look at the location of Turkey, a multi-regional actor, which is very unique. You can't say something like this about other countries. It is a Mediterranean country. It is a Black Sea region country. It's a Middle Eastern country, and it has interest or involvement, engagement in the Caspian Sea region as well. So the entire, on all four sides of Turkey, east, west, south, and north, everywhere Turkey plays a very important role. In terms of Black Sea region, Turkey has played a very stabilizing role. Post Cold War, if you look at the trajectory of Turkish foreign policy, even in the Caspian region and South Caucasus, Turkey is a very strong player, no doubt about it, and it has played somewhat stabilizing role. The same can be said about the Balkan region as well. And this Turkey did both as an independent regional country, as a as part of NATO, membership, as a NATO country, which means the all these things Turkey was doing was in alignment with what the Western interests were. So Turkish and Western interests were aligning in stabilizing this region. Now, when it comes to the Middle East, there is some divergence in terms of what Turkish interests were and what the US and NATO and then EU interests were. And this divergence started to become more prominent by late 2000. So until 2008-9, you would see that even after the US invasion of Iraq, there were divergence even at that time, but they developed a functional kind of relationship. So US was encouraging Turkey to come to Iraq and at least have some kind of good stabilizing role in the Kurdish region. And there was lots of energy engagements, economic engagements. Despite of the fact that Turkey was initially completely against an autonomous Kurdish region within Iraq, still it came out and worked with the for the larger, geopolitics. Now, from 2008-9 onwards, things started to diverge more prominently, and this became completely unraveled after 2010-11. Both two factors were very important. Turkish own understanding of what Turkish interests are, how Turkey defined its interests, and then how it pursued it. So, defining the interest, Turkey took a very, very strong position that it is against any non-democratic or regimes which are against the people or which people were protesting against. So, for example, if you look at Syria, Libya, even in Tunisia, and many other regional countries, Turkey, especially President Erdogan, who was at that time prime minister, he went on a tour of the region, talked about how there should be a Turkey model which has to be followed in the region, and there was some reception and welcome to this also. It was there. It was not as if it was completely hollow in that sense. But then you have to understand the fine line between encouraging people to do something and then forcing people to do something. I think Turkey went beyond that line and started to take use force, not just in terms of military force, but in terms of politically trying to do things which might not have been possible. I think so somewhere Turkey crossed that line. I would say Syria is a primary example of that. The relationship between the Turkish state and some of the opposition movements, which were, following extremist ideologies, fundamentalist ideologies, that also came under the question as to how can Turkey uh, promote these actors rather than promoting actors which are more rational, which are more inclusive. So I think somewhere I would say there is a term, if I have to use, which can be called as strategic outreach, strategic overreach, not outreach. So Turkey somewhere did that strategic overreach in the Middle East during and after the 2011, 10-11 uprisings. But gradually by 2020-21, you would see that Turkey is now trying to reverse or kind of a bit go back into its position and try and see how it can reconcile with regional actors. And that process has also kind of started, but we'll have to see how it pans out in the near future.
When we say that the regional stability is important for the region and for the actors that are involved in, when we say there is a reality that US has shifting for it's shifting its focus from Middle East to Indo-Pacific, and when we also see that there is a space and sort of geopolitical rivalry that's happening on the ground in the region. China is filling the vacuum one or the other way. Russia has its own interests out there, and also the member states of the West Asia, they also have certain issues bilaterally. So, given all these realities, what we it just brings us to an important issue of role of China in the region, because that's directly proportional to the interests of India. And where do you see that China's involvement in the region and its import, its influence on India's engagement with the region? Because it's strategically very, very important for India as well.
Absolutely. When it comes to China, one has to look at the trajectory of China's growing engagement with the region since 2012, 13, onwards. The involvement was there even before, but the way it has accelerated between since 2012, 13, especially after the launch of what is now known as the Belt and Road Initiative. At that time, I think it was called One Belt, One Road initiative. So that is part of how China is trying to approach the region. I think somewhere I'm not a expert on Chinese foreign policy, but I think somewhere China looks at itself as a major actor in the global politics, in the global order as well. We know that after the United States, China is the strongest global power. Even though there is a huge gap between the power, there is a power differential between China and the United States. But again, when it comes to the economic issues, China has strategic partnership with almost 17 countries in the region, in the entire West Asia region. Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, UAE, many other countries, even with Israel. With most of the regional actors, China is the largest trading partner. So bilateral trade, China is maximum. If you look at energy, supplies, energy exports from the region, China is the largest recipient. I think India comes next, and then Japan and South Korea and other countries. But one has to also remember that China is not the only other actor which has increased its involvement in the region in the economic sphere. If you look at Japan, if you look at South Korea, if you look at India, among major actors, if you look at Indonesia, Malaysia, as a, if you want to call them regional actors or, emerging kind of actors, or other countries as well, they have, because of their growing economic needs, their involvement with the region has increased, mostly on energy security question. So a lot of them are developing very fast and they require energy, and most of them are energy poor in that sense that they don't domestically have that much resources. So they have to bring it from the region. So China has done the same thing. What distinguishes Chinese approach is that its ambitions. China is a very ambitious actor and it wants to increase its sphere of influence beyond its immediate borders. And that is something which is now being talked about in the strategic circles and the global, if you look at the global discussion on China and the Middle East, there are two views. One is that China, whether is China a benign actor or is China a very aggressive actor? And increasingly, people are recognizing this fact that China is not a benign actor. Now, as far as India's, how it impacts India, I think it impacts India significantly. If you look at any of the issues, China would come as one of the major competitors for India, whether it is energy security, whether it is shipping. Even in shipping, maritime security, there is some understanding between China and India where they actually have cooperated for the over the last, I would say, decade actually. But that there also there are problems. And then if you look at the kind of strategic investments which China is doing in developing ports, in developing connectivity, I think that is where the threat for India lies, where India has to, increase its involvement, engagement in the region to be able to compete with China. So that is something which is very important. There are a lot of specific issues which we can discuss, but I think there is some paucity of time, so I would stop there.
There is a long list of questions that still will be on the standby mood, given the limitation of the time that we have. I guess it's important for me as a moderator, and also I would always love to have you on another discussion vis-a-vis India's foreign policy and the region of West Asia. I guess that will help in order to understand India's commitment to its interests and its engagement with the larger region of West Asia, especially post 2014, because that has been we can see the uphill and the upscaling of the entire bilateral and multilateral engagements India has with the region. So I guess we can just have that session next time if time permits and if your schedule permits. You can join us. Thanks a lot, and we will always love to have you on another session on this topic, sir.
Thank you very much, Mehraj. I think I really enjoyed the discussion today. And certainly, I mean, we can have some discussion on separate discussion on India and the region. Very quickly, it's true that India has, increased its involvement in the region, and it is since 2014 onwards, things have really, changed. things have accelerated is extraordinarily, but we need to do a lot. We have
Yeah,
to also realize that.
sure. We'll have another discussion on this. Thank you, sir. Thank you for coming.
Have a nice day.
Thank you.